Chelsea. This is my channel, Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm coming at you with another BooktubeSFF Babbles video. Now, the BooktubeSFF Babbles are recommendation and discussion prompts provided in association with the BooktubeSFF Awards. I'll link all of the information down below. Now, this week's topic is Underhyped SFF, so underhyped sci-fi and fantasy. And this is one of those topics that in some form or another slightly different to this I have had occasion to do on my channel several times before. I think all of my previous underhyped book recommendation videos have been from prompts where the terminology used was underrated. I decided that those two are pretty dang close to interchangeable, so I'm going to be using the same set of guidelines for this list that I gave myself for my previous underrated recommendation videos. My last one of those was in August of 2018. It was a pretty long list. I'll link it down below. And in the description of that video, I think I've linked my previous one. So if you're interested in my history of doing this topic, you can go down that rabbit hole if you choose. But the way I do underrated book recs is I sort my read shelf on Goodreads by number of Goodreads ratings. And for something to be on my underhyped or underrated list, it has to be currently, at the time I'm filming this video, under 1,000 Goodreads ratings. My other rule is that if I'm gonna recommend it, it's probably gonna be something that I gave either 4 or 5 stars, and I don't include sequels unless the first book in the series is also under 1,000 ratings. Now, because I do this topic with some regularity, I don't repeat books I've recommended before. So these are all books that I have read since I made that video, and it so happens that these are all relatively recently published books as well. Recently published books, of course, are not expected to stay under 1,000 ratings forever. However, these are all, to me, pretty clearly books that are underhyped in the sense that they didn't have enough maybe publicity or word of mouth straight out of the gate to have gotten them over that 1,000 rating mark, yet none of these are books that are like still under 1,000 ratings because they were just published yesterday. I don't do that. So in that sense of underhyped books, as you know, recently released books that could use more hype, this particular list of underrated books does fit the bill. And I do find it gratifying when I go back and look at those previous videos I made to see how many of the books that I listed in those videos have now increased in the number of Goodreads ratings that they have substantially. So I'll be going in order in this video from most ratings to fewest, and I'll be giving you the number of Goodreads ratings with every book. The first on my list is Finding Baba Yaga by Jane Yolen, and this is at 935 ratings. This is a short contemporary coming-of-age story told in poetry that uses Russian folklore to tell the story of a girl who runs away from an abusive home situation and finds her own source of power. I have a review of this book on my channel, so I will link it. Jane Yolen is one of those kind of classic authors of fairy tale-based fiction who's been around long enough that if fairy tale-based fiction is your thing, you probably know who she is. That said, I'm not sure how many people who know who she is know that she's like still writing and had this book out from Tor.com in 2018. This is sort of the phenomenon where well-respected women who are writing SFF and have been for decades sort of get shelved and relegated to history before their time when they're like still writing new books, dang it. Next at 870 ratings is A Conspiracy of Truths by Alexandra Rowland, which is the first in what is at this point a companion duology about traveling storytellers called Chants in a very large, diverse fantasy world full of all sorts of myth and folklore. This is a very political story about how one grumpy chant takes down an entire country's political system by telling the right stories to the right people. That is the most succinct way I can sum this book up for you. The second book in this series is going to be further on down the list. Spoilers. Next is going to be a book I was actually surprised at how few ratings it had because I thought I saw a lot of hype for this book from people I follow around the time it was released, and that is Miranda and Milan by Katharine Duckett at 584 ratings. This is another novella-length book from Tor.com. I guess I maybe just like already follow all of the people who would be hyping up queer revisionist Shakespeare fantasy books. Maybe my blinders are just very narrow, and so I assumed that more people were talking about this book than were. But this is exactly what it sounds like. This is a sequel story to The Tempest about what happens to Miranda when her father takes her back to their ancestral home in Milan prior to her planned wedding with Ferdinand, and things do not go well for her there. Next is a short story collection that I recently read and really loved, and that is A Cathedral of Myth and Bone by Kat Howard, whose short fiction is a reliable win for me. And this has 365 ratings on Goodreads. This collection contains both new and reprint stories. There is notably a new novella in this called Once Future that's an Arthurian thing that takes place with grad students on a college campus. There are a lot of stories about sainthood and the miracles of sainthood in here. A lot of the stories are quite dark, and there are a lot of thematic through lines and different sort of motifs that draw a lot of these stories together. A lot about art and artists, a lot of cathedrals, a lot of bones. The writing is lovely. I really recommend this, and this is one where I think Kat Howard is better known for her novels than her short stories, and I really think her short fiction is great, and I feel like a collection from her should have been a bigger deal and received more attention than it did. Next up with 343 ratings is the only middle grade novel on this list, The Dark Lord Clementine by Sarah Jean Horwitz. Horwitz is an author I sort of stumbled upon by accident because her debut novel just looked so cool. That one was Karma and Grit, The Wing Snatchers. I think this is a step up from that in terms of quality. It shows some growth. I think if you like Castle Hangnail by Ursula Vernon, this ticks quite a few of the same boxes with a, plucky middle grade heroine trying to run a creepy castle, but this dabbles in a lot of other fantasy tropes as well. It's really fun. It's about a girl named Clementine who is the heir to a dark lordship and has to take on all of her father's responsibilities when something terrible happens to him. I do have a full review of this book. I will link it. Next up at 323 ratings is another short story collection. This is Snow White Learns Witchcraft by Theodora Goss, which contains both stories and poems. Now, I am pretty sure that the reason that this collection is so underhyped is because it comes from a small press. This is published by Mythic Delirium. These are all fairy tale inspired. Again, it's a very thematically cohesive collection. This is, I think, the first book on this list that was a 5-star read for me, full 5 stars. I have a full review of this one as well. I believe it's in the same video as my review of Finding Baba Yaga. That's a double book review video. I feel like I am the one-woman booktube hype machine for this book, and I'm not ashamed of it. These stories and poems personally hit a lot of really lovely emotional notes for me, and that's my sort of litmus test for a 5-star read is like, did this do something in my soul that is really special, and this really did. Next on this list, as promised, is A Choir of Lies by Alexandra Rowland, the sequel to A Conspiracy of Truths, which follows a character who was a supporting character, a major supporting character, but a supporting character in the first book. This one is more explicitly hope punk-y than the first book, to use a term that Rowland coined, and so it's one of the books that I'm sort of thinking about and recommending during this particularly tough time in world history, but this book was also a 5-star read for me because I was really drawn into, and there were things I identified with, in the character story of the protagonist Ilfing, who was the apprentice to the Chant in the first book and is now on his own. And this has 219 Goodreads ratings. And then the very last book on this list at only 54 ratings is another book from a small press. This is a novella. This is Every River Runs to Salt by Rachael K. Jones. This is my most underhyped book I've got to offer you today. This is a sort of bizarre, surreal quest to an underworld type of story. It takes place in present-day Athens, Georgia, in the American South. It has a female-female romance, and Jones's writing is like rich and gorgeous. This was published in 2018, and it still only has 54 Goodreads ratings. That can't be right. That must change. Anyhow, that is it. That is the end of my list. Here they are. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you agree with my definition of underhyped, or if I should be trying to gauge actual community interest in a different sort of way. Anyhow, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.